We're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but tonight we are continuing our Horrorween month as we are continuing down the yellow brick road. Although I should introduce you to our host for the evening, Dane. Why don't you tell us what movie we have in store for the audience?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Well, tonight's movie is a personal favorite of mine, and I suspect most, if not all of us here, will probably feel the same way. It is the 1985 children's film Return to Oz, directed by Walter Murch, distributed by Disney. Kind of a forgotten Disney classic for a while there. In fact, a movie that was roundly despised by critics and audiences when it came out, but it has since gone on to be considered one of the most faithful Oz adaptations that there is, and a cult classic and a treasured Disney film during their more experimental period of the 80s, and an outstanding dark fantasy film from the period. It's directed by Walter Murch, who is best known for being a film editor and a sound designer. He had 3 Oscar wins under his belt. He worked on THX 1138, Apocalypse Now, The Godfather trilogy, American Graffiti, The Conversation, The English Patient. He's just a total lightweight, as you can tell. Nothing, nothing of note out of all those. But this was actually his directorial debut, and unfortunately, it was also the last film that he ever directed. He co-wrote the script with Gil Dennis, who came up with the story, and this film combines the second and third Oz books, The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, and it kind of smushes them together into one. Um, and it stars Fairuza Balk as Dorothy. You got Jean Marsh, you got Piper Laurie, Nicole Williamson. You got what's his face? Brian Henson, Jim Henson's son, voicing Jack Pumpkinhead. Uh, you got all kinds of amazing creatures from the extended Oz universe getting their time in the sun in this thing. Um, and of course, the Gnome King is our antagonist. It's just awesome, at least in my opinion. Um, but yeah, this film performed poorly at the box office. It was universally despised by critics and audiences who just wanted the 1939 film again, pretty much. But nowadays, it generally is pretty beloved by a certain core of fans of Oz books and Oz adaptations and dark fantasy in general. As you can no doubt tell, I'm a huge fan of this film, and I go into some more depth about it in my own web series that has been running all October long, called Oztober, which you can find on my channel Dangerous Arts. Just look up Oztober as well. But yeah, so let us go around the room and let's get our impressions of what we thought of this film. As you can tell, I'm a big fan. Now, this was not my pick, but I am very thankful that Brandon brought it forth for us to talk about. So, Brandon, I'm guessing this is not your first time having seen the film, correct?
Yeah, I've known about this film for a while. I think I'm the one who actually put this one up when we originally put it out because I really liked this film. I watched it, I can't remember when I watched it. I watched it probably in the 80s first time. It was something that was a little bit creepy for me as a child seeing it, but I really loved the art design on it. I thought the Gnome King was really cool. I liked the whole the chicken character, and Jack was really neat, which I think is an appropriate movie for Halloween because you got the Jack is appropriate character for Halloween. And in general, I really liked the film. I had seen the original Oz, Wizard of Oz before this, so it was such a departure from that film. I was too young. I hadn't really started reading books. Well, I've read books, but not quite at that level yet. For as far as the well, that's not true either. I read one of the sequels to the Oz book. I remember it because there was a there was like an animal, and one of the characters was a hobo or something that was turned into an animal. It was been a long time since I read that one. But this one was so different for me because it was so dark. That it wasn't. It had a little bit of the whimsy of the original Oz movie and what I remembered of it, but not nearly as much as you would expect. And I really liked that. I thought it was good that you could take that series and go this way. And it even surprised me more that Disney had put that out. So finding it again later on, and then eventually upgrading it to Blu-ray from DVD, it was just well worth it. I'm glad to have it in my collection, and it was a pleasure watching this again.
That's awesome. So, fun fact about this coming out from Disney. So, MGM had the rights to the original book back when none of the original 14 books, when they were all still under copyright from the L. Frank Baum estate, the family trust. Um, so they own the rights to the first book. But Walt Disney himself actually bought the rights to the sequel novels that L. Frank Baum had written, and he was going to do a movie called Rainbow Road to Oz, but it never got made. Um, they did some tests, and they did a showcase with the Musketeers, because that's who it was originally supposed to star, and just it didn't quite take off. That movie never got made, and then before the books fell into public domain, Disney was like, "We got one more shot at this," um, and so then they did Return to Oz, and that was during the period where Disney was trying to figure out who they were, what their identity was, because like the 70s was all about Disney basically taking Walt's table scraps of ideas, because he obviously had died in the late 60s. They basically took all his table scraps of ideas and sketches and things and made them into what comprised Disney's 70s catalog. And then in the 80s, they were really struggling to find their identity, and they didn't really come back until The Little Mermaid in 89. So this was during that experimental period where they were getting into more dark territory and that kind of stuff, but it was also a chance to try to make something out of these rights that they owned. Um, but yeah, it is a very dark movie. Forrest, did you see this when you were a kid, or was this a first time watch for you?
I knew of this movie when I was a kid. Like I remember seeing ads for it on the Disney Channel back in the day, but I never got around to seeing it until I was an adult. Um, this was actually not a first time watch for me. I saw it for the first time several years ago. I actually, but yeah, as I said, had seen ads for it on the Disney Channel. I had seen a YouTube, and I had seen an old YouTube clip of on YouTube of Siskel and Ebert taking a piss on this movie.
They
But
called it one of their worst of 85.
yeah, and their it seems like their chief complaint was that it wasn't as colorful, and it wasn't this colorful musical like the original movie was, and
Yeah.
so to which I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm just rolling my eyes I'm rolling my eyes at their take on it.
I know, but and I'm with you completely. But it is worth noting that that was a common feeling at the time. And I actually, in my
Yeah,
Oztober video, that'll be my video in my Oztober series about this film will be coming out on the 15th of this month. But that was a common feeling that was going around at the
too
time,
dark.
because by that point, the 1939 film, through all of the re-airings on television and that kind of stuff, it had gotten
Right.
cemented as the American classic we know it today. So then they were just echoing a lot of those common sentiments that I'm sure were being felt at the time.
Yeah, that's what it seems. That's what it seems like. But yeah, I've seen. But yeah, I did, I actually. But yeah, I didn't see this one until I didn't see it as a kid. I did see it as an adult. I should be upfront right now that I have never read any of the. I haven't gotten around to reading the Oz books yet.
You
But overall,
should.
yeah, I know. But overall, I was very impressed. I was very impressed with this. I think the puppet work by Henson is fantastic. I definitely like the more macabre atmosphere of it. I feel like it would make a great. I feel like actually, watching it, although because I watched this twice before this episode this episode, and it kind of got me thinking that this would make this would make a great double feature with Labyrinth.
Yeah, it actually would. That or the Dark Crystal.
Yes. Although I don't know, I feel like maybe although I don't know, maybe it's because of Henson, or if it's both. They're both about young girls getting caught up in these fantasy worlds with some fantastic puppet work by the Henson Company.
Well, and it's 80s dark fantasy, and
yes,
now the 80s was a golden age of dark fantasy movies. And that's different from, say, like the 2000s and especially the 2010s, which really got into what we would call high fantasy, like with Lord of the Rings and stuff like that.
Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, 80s was all about dark fantasy, which is a very specific subgenre, but this is one of the more illustrious entries in that subgenre, I think.
Absolutely. And yeah, I do think, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I have not read the Oz books, but I do, as I understand that this, having gone into this, so this is actually supposed to be more tonally faithful to Frank Baum's original, more to L. Frank Baum's original vision for this universe and these characters.
Yeah, and it is. Like, it does smush two books together. But honestly, you wouldn't. The differences are not as stark as you necessarily might think.
I should mention that I had seen that prior to this movie, I had seen this straight-to-video animated feature called Dorothy Meets Ozma of Oz. It was from the late. It was just like a straight-to-video animated feature from the late '80s, that was my first exposure to characters like TikTok and Ozma, and also the
Gnome King.
The Gnome King, yeah. Goblin King is Labyrinth. I'm getting these two movies confused already. But the Gnome King was. But yeah, so I at least had already been at least been familiarized with some of these characters. Although I was a little surprised that characters like the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion didn't show up until late in this movie.
Yeah.
Their design was odd too. Their design was very interesting as well. The way that they
there's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason for that. It's because the designs of the characters here actually match their book equivalents much more closely. The versions that are in the 1939 film, like, they cover off the basics and everything, but just the way they look in this film, especially like, say, the Cowardly Lion, who's an actual like four-legged creature and not like some humanoid bipedal creature, which that always bugged me about the 1939 film. I was like, I want to see an actual lion, and you don't see him very much here, but he is on four legs and everything, and he's got the bow in his hair, he's got the same expression, all that stuff. And then actually the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, especially, their faces match the original illustrations. So and even Dorothy's the correct age, because that also kind of bugged me about the 1939 film.
Yeah, she's a lot more mature looking.
She's the 17-year-old girl trying to pretend to be a lot younger, and
at least it's not like a 35-year-old Diana Ross.
Oh, I know, that's atrocious on that front. But yeah, they actually got Fairuza Balk, who was like 10 or 11 years old at the time, and
such a good Dorothy for this one, I think.
She is.
Really.
I find because I had seen The Craft and The Waterboy prior to Return to Oz, so I feel it's funny to look back and watching her as a kid and seeing her it's like being set up for playing characters who are either witches or accused of being the devil, and
Yeah.
then doing and
Or
then do but
crazy in some way, like in The Water Boy.
yeah, exactly. Oh,
Yep.
man. Oh God, I was going to mention one other thing, but it's just not. But it just slipped my mind.
Feel free to interject if it comes back.
Oh, the Wheelers. Yeah, I should mention
Wheelers.
also. I was also from the Wheelers were other characters that the other characters that I had some familiarity with going into this.
Yes, and they are in the books as well.
So,
as is the Gnome King, although the Gnome King's design is different here than it was in the books. In the books, he looks like an old man, kind of like if you combine Dr. Eggman with Santa Claus. That's kind of how he looks.
Oh, I was thinking Doctor. I was thinking like either Dr. Light from Mega Man or David the Gnome.
That too. But then here he's like a rock creature. But they do some really cool things with it. But we'll get into that in a bit. Jake, was this a first time watch for you?
Believe it or not, yes, it was. Well, the thing is, I of course grew up with the 1939 film. It was never exactly what you might say on regular rotation, but we definitely saw it many times over the years, and I watched it again just for fun as sort of preparation for this. So I got a little bit of a compare and contrast, which was nice. But other than that, I've not watched a lot of the Oz stuff, and I've not read the books, so I would like to read them one of these days, and I'd like to see some of the others. I've been watching your program, and some of these movies, I'm like, I gotta check that out one of these days.
Well, stay tuned for when the whole series is done, because then there's going to be some bonus videos, and one of them is going to be ranking Oztober, so you'll know kind of where they fall on my scale of quality, so you'll know where to start.
Good times. But and yes, I do I agree with Forrest's sentiment that when I learned that this one starred Fairuza Balk as Dorothy, I'm like, well, isn't that something? Because while I did unfortunately miss the discussion on The Craft, and I really was annoyed that I did, but it was still, it's a movie I enjoy. But I've seen several, including Craft Legacy, but several films with Fairuza Balk where, American History X comes to mind. She does tend to play rather dark characters much of the time. I definitely associate her with darker and often crazy roles. So the idea that this was her feature film debut is intriguing to me. The idea as well, the visual appearance was quite different on a lot of these. It kind of, it surprised me tremendously, not knowing the books and knowing what to look for. The look of the Tin Man and Scarecrow and whatever was definitely surprising. But the it shared an interesting coincidence it shared some traits with our recent viewing of The Gate and Gate 2, where again, Brandon and I watched them out of order. So we watched our boy Terry get younger for the second viewing. And so I had the same thing happen with Dorothy here. And it's interesting that it takes place 6 months later with an actress that's 6 years younger. I think that was kind of amusing to me. But overall, it was interesting. It was being my first introduction to some of the characters like Jack the Pumpkin and TikTok, who's a contender there apparently for Mustache Matinee.
I think he's the automatic winner, personally. Because not only does he have that mustache, but it can move up and down, and he's thankful for not being alive. So he's rocking that mustache, and he does not care who he upsets because of how amazing it is. So he gets my vote.
But
Note this
Yeah.
as the first installment in our Mustache Matinee series.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, we could probably do that. I know we're
Preemptive
going to have
entry.
some stashes next week, if I remember correctly. I feel like Dracula had a couple of them.
Well, in the Jesus Franco version, he
Yeah.
has a mustache, and actually talk about designs from the books and stuff.
Mm.
Dracula in the book has a mustache, but very,
Mhm.
very, 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 very few film adaptations show him with facial hair.
Except for John Carradine and Gary Oldman.
And Jesus Franco.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty cool. But
Yeah.
the look of TikTok in here is amazing. He looks
Yeah.
he looks so close to his book counterpart.
And he does seem like rather a fun character overall. And I liked a lot of this. I liked a lot of the concepts that I saw. It was darker. It was a little creepy at times, and I'll be honest, my mind drifted, although again, with me, timing is everything with trying to sit down and watch something to give it full focus. But it it was a good first impression, and I'll give this another go eventually, no doubt about it.
I'll say this. I'll say this. You will be rewarded for taking multiple dives into it, because as I have done so myself, more and more things stick out to me, and more depths of meaning, more amazing nuances that I observe, and that kind of stuff, some of which we will get to as we go along. So you would definitely behoove yourself kind of taking and revisiting this. Now,
Good deal.
before we get to Dave, because I know Dave will inevitably disagree with this, but I'm trying to segue. So the movie is called Return to Oz, so it already kind of implies a sequel. We have the ruby slippers in this. Now, the story behind that is that in the books, it's the silver shoes, and then MGM changed them to the ruby slippers because they had Technicolor and they wanted it to pop. They want to get their money's worth out of this new technology, so the sparkling color was more attractive, so they changed it to the ruby slippers. There are numerous little things like that that MGM and now Warner Brothers, because it's in the Warner Brothers film library, they own bits of those iconography. People who do future Oz adaptations, now that the 14 books are in the public domain, if one were to do that, you'd have to probably just use the silver shoes, because those are in the public domain. The ruby slippers are not. But Disney actually paid a fee to MGM to use the ruby slippers, and it's called Return to Oz, so it kind of implies a sequel. But for my money, I don't really think of this as a sequel to the 1939 film, because the designs are matching the books a lot closer. The age of Dorothy's so different. She's the correct age this time. It's not a musical. It's in color. It's in widescreen. It's a different studio, different time period in which it's made, different intention. So for my money, I don't consider it a sequel. I do consider it a sequel to the original Oz story. But I will say I think they kind of muddy the waters a bit when it comes to the fact that it's the title and the ruby slippers. But I know Dave considers it to be a sequel, and so that provides a segue into his first impressions. I'm guessing that this was not a first time watch.
No, it is definitely not a first time watch. And actually, I think it's kind of both. It somewhere wanders into to the middle ground. It is, in a sense, or essence, a sequel to the original 1939. They started out that way. So of course, you'd think, and yeah, you did say that the title does lead you to believe that. So, yeah, the first part of the movie, you're getting a second part to the story. What happens afterwards? When she comes back from Oz. But but that is where the movie then takes a turn and becomes its own thing, because they were trying to be true to the Books of Oz, and I do like that aspect of the film. No, this is not a first time watch. I actually like this film a lot. I love watching it. I love TikTok as a character. That's not my first introduction to him, though. I actually knew him from an animated feature that was originally called Thanksgiving in the Land of Oz, which is now Dorothy and the Land of Oz, or Dorothy. You can find it on a double feature with Pippi Longstocking. or something
Send
of
that
that
to
nature.
me if you can, because I do intend to bring Oztober back next year, and I will want to cover off some things that I didn't cover in the first go around. So I mean, that would be cool to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. But I love the characters of the Whalers. Even though I know now, looking backwards, they do look kind of funky. But I love the fact that it is dark, and the fact that we get a family that is on because of the storm that happened in the first one. We get the devastation afterwards, and the fact that that her uncle is like out of work and he's like hurt, and she's like the only one that's supposed to be able to help, and basically. You almost feel like there might be some child abuse going on a little bit, but and the fact that she is being relied upon. So you know, the whole thing is basically, okay, we got to get rid of this whole shit. So I'll take it.
I mean,
You know,
keep in mind, like farms at the time, and the time that the movie would take place during. I mean, they're relying on all the children to do
Yeah,
as much as they can to help
Right.
out. And Dorothy would have been, under normal circumstances, she would probably have been very involved in doing her chores to help
well,
Mhm.
and she is. I mean, because
out to keep the
she's
farm
with.
running.
Well, she is. She's there
Yeah.
with Belina,
It's just
trying
that
to get
her
the eggs
she's
laid, and
she's still at that age where everything is just a wonder, and the imagination is kind of
Right.
everything in the mind of a child. You're still trying to be a child. You're still trying to have an imagination. You're not trying to grow up.
yeah,
Right.
You know?
Although there is a reason why, to this day, there is an agricultural exemption to child labor laws. You know, it's
yeah,
because they really do expect you by the time you're 10, you're going to be working.
yeah.
And
Yep.
Well,
if there was any child abuse here, I would put that more on the what we come to see after they go to that
the clinic. Yeah,
clinic. I use
Well, yeah.
use the
And
term loosely.
For many years, I thought the actor Nicol Williamson was Charles Dance for many years. So the last couple of times that I've seen it, I realized that it was not in fact Charles Dance. So, but I am glad that we get to see Merlin from Excalibur, and he also played in Venom, which was another 1980s horror film.
I tell you, if Dr. Worley had been Charles Dance, then you'd know he was evil.
Yeah, you do raise
Well-
so you do raise an interesting point about the something I've never considered before. And this is coming from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the book from 1900, the original book. So in there, like it actually makes more sense in the 1939 film that they have farmhands and everything, because in the book it's just Uncle Henry, Aunt Em, and Dorothy and Toto, and that's it, like it is here. But you would also be like, well, shouldn't they have a ton of children around, to essentially be the free labor force? Or if not that, then the farm hands that they have in the 39 film, that would make a little bit more sense as far as the making a viable farm. But then again, they do have a line of dialogue in the beginning that they kind of had to dismiss the farm hands
I
there as part
do
of
like
That is where they
I
fail.
do like the farm hands in the original because then they end up being like the
Yeah.
scarecrow in the other, and being a reason why why
Yeah.
all the faces are familiar.
And
And
that
I do like that aspect of that film, but that was also a totally different time period too.
Yeah, well, so here's interesting facts about that. So, a lot of people have said that they thought that the 1939 version, now they don't really come out and spell it out either way, but like, so the book was written in 1900, kind of then about then contemporary American rural life. The movie's in 1939. You don't see any automobiles in there. You just see like wagons and stuff. Now, technologically, the world hadn't advanced overly much, especially not in rural Kansas. There's no way that it would have advanced too much. So you could buy it as that time period or the time period in which the books were written, either one. Uh, this film is they explicitly say that it's in October of 1899 on the eve of turning into the new century, 1900. So I appreciated that it was actually set in the time period of the books. I really, really like that. But I think that's an interesting kind of point of difference there. Then meanwhile, the whole idea of real world equivalents of the Oz characters, that was an invention of the 1939 film. Um, the books, Oz is 100% a real place that Dorothy went to, as opposed to like they kind of in the 39 film they kind of imply that it might be in her subconscious or something like that. But what's interesting is that other adaptations have made it something of a tradition to have real world equivalents of the Oz characters. And this film does continue that tradition, but it does take it in new, interesting directions, which I really love. And we'll get into that.
I
One
really
But
thing I
like
wanted
that
to say
aspect of the film.
go for it.
One thing I wanted to say as to my viewing or my opinions of this film is I do like the fact that um, they did do use some of the real people that were involved in her reality, in her Oz reality, as well as like the villains.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure that they actually did that for the characters that were good, like the Gump and TikTok and all that. Those weren't like adaptations of real people in her real reality of the
Yeah.
things.
And that's a good point bring up, because
So
that was the most notable thing with the 1939 film was the farmhands became her companions there, and
Right.
Miss Gulch became the witch, all that stuff. You only really see equivalents of the Gnome King and of Princess Mombi and of the Wheelers, but you don't see it of the
Right. And strangely enough,
heroes. No, you well, actually, no. Wait, sorry. You kind of no, you do. Sorry, you do. Just not in the ways you expect. So you see, in the cell, the room that she's in. You see the girl with the jack o' lantern. You see the electroshock therapy machine, which has a mechanical face like TikTok, and you see
okay,
what's the other one?
that's right. The pumpkin that she was given in her
Yes.
yeah,
room
yeah,
Yeah.
was okay. So
Yeah.
they were more objects than they were people,
Yes,
Right.
Which
exactly.
goes along with the
Which
whole antique concept
like
later
props.
on in the game. I mean, again, in
right.
the movie, because really and truly, I think it does connect. And It would not surprise me if that was purposeful in that connection.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well. So, I mean, those are all great for first impressions.
Well,
Go.
I want to go ahead. Well, just I wanted to comment a couple things on the whole.
Yeah.
I wonder, and you might know. I don't know if you came across this while putting your thing together or not, but like, I wonder if Wizard of Oz was kind of one of the first, if not the first, really to do that. But that has become kind of a regular thing in a lot of productions. Like one that comes notably to mind is that traditionally in productions of Peter Pan, the same person plays the father and Captain Hook. And I just think that it's not always the case, but it's tradition in most productions of the story. And
Mhm.
so that's a very similar equivalent. You have potentially they went to another world, but then
Yeah.
was it a dream? And
Well, so
e-
that was
yeah,
something that, again, like I said, books, that's not the case whatsoever. Like Oz is 100% a real place, and in fact, in later
right.
books, Dorothy brings Uncle Henry and Aunt Em to Oz to live with her. But that tradition that you're speaking of, I do think the 39 film did that, and then later versions and spin-offs and derivative things, I think that they did sort of take that up as a tradition or as a challenge or whatever. Like, so you saw that happen here. You saw that happen in Oz the Great and Powerful. You saw that a little bit with the 2002 Lost in Oz pilot that didn't really go anywhere. You saw a couple other ones that would do that. Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return did that. So it did kind of start its own tradition. It's interesting that they're emulating that film and not really the books there. But yes, it did start a tradition. I do think it yields some actually interesting kind of psychological equivalence of characters and comparison, contrast, and that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, that's an important thing to bring up. Interestingly enough, for myself, I did not see this film as a kid, and I hadn't even really until I saw the Nostalgia Critics Top 11 Underrated Nostalgia Classics video. That was like when I was in my early 20s. And then only like maybe a few years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, did I see this movie finally for the first time, and I really loved it. And I've seen it many, many times since then. And it's one of those movies I will just occasionally go back and just I want to re-immerse myself in it because each time I watch it, I get a lot of additional meaning out of it. Because I think, yeah, it's everyone always talks about what a creepy film it is, and it definitely can be, but it's not all creepy. I mean, it's got a lot of creepy things, but it's got uplifting moments. It's got a lot of tragedy. It's got a lot of hope. It's got a lot of, it takes you on an emotional roller coaster like a good movie should do. Um,
Indeed.
and it also, I think the movie's really about like how children with trauma and with loss and with having to pick up the pieces of a broken life while and in the face of people trying to take your identity from you, about holding on to who you really are using your imagination, and but also not retreating from the real world because um, Dorothy does have to kind of essentially have elements of both the real world and Oz with her at all times in order to succeed and to mature and to get through the challenges of her life.
I also would like to input that I also think it's also about how her aunt and uncle deal with her um, whole reality of things. Once she's realized that she's been missing, then they don't care, no, about the fact that she's like got this huge imagination or whatnot. All they really cared about was getting her back and
Yes.
whatnot in the end. So to me, it's more a little bit more about the realization that okay, yeah, we've been through these harsh times, but I'm just glad to have her back.
Yeah, it puts their struggles in perspective too. You're right. Um, well, again, we can get a little bit into plot. It's you can sum it up fairly quickly. So the film starts off with obviously the tornado happened. The farm is still wrecked. They're trying to rebuild after the storm, all that stuff. The most important thing about that beginning stage is that Dorothy is suffering from insomnia. She cannot sleep. Um, and there's a line of dialogue that she has that actually kind of breaks my heart, like in a good way. It's where she says, and it's very soft. You can barely hear it, but she says, I wish I could put my head on my paws and go to sleep like Toto. For whatever reason, that line just really gets to me, and I think it's because I too had a lot of trouble sleeping when I was a kid. I could never fall asleep when I wanted to, and I had a really overactive imagination and that kind of stuff. So I've been there, and then especially with her having been through what she went through with the storm and with going to Oz and coming back and all that stuff. Yeah, I can totally imagine why she would be in that state, but she can't sleep. She keeps talking about this fantastical place where there's talking scarecrows and all these other ridiculous things that her aunt and uncle can't possibly understand. Meanwhile, they're drowning in debt, and they've got this girl who's not useful in the mornings because she can't sleep at night. Useful meaning, she can't work on the farm, etc. And they have a chicken named Belina who just ate her eggs, and so it's I like the parallel between Dorothy and Belina because they're both not doing their job. They're not fulfilling their
Right.
purpose on the farm, and yet they will both go on this fantastical journey together, and they will prove themselves. So, in fact, they're good
Right.
parallel characters in very
Belena's just too
unexpected ways.
busy. Belena's just too busy cracking wise the whole time to
Yeah,
worry about laying eggs.
Oh,
yeah.
I love Belina. Belina is
I agree.
a fun
And
character.
Belina was in Ozma of Oz, so basically I'd say Return to Oz probably gets most of its plot points from Ozma of Oz, but it brings some of the Marvelous Land of Oz characters into it with so Mombi in this film is actually a combination of Mombi the witch from the second one and Princess Langwidere from the third one from Ozma of Oz with the interchangeable heads and everything. Um, and you get Jack Pumpkinhead from Marvelous Land of Oz, the Gump, no TikToks from the third one, but you get some characters here and there that kind of get brought from the other one, but most of it is from Ozma of Oz. But point being,
She she ends up
Dorothy,
finding a key.
go ahead.
She ends up
Yes,
finding a
she
key.
finds a key that has the OZ in the handle of the key, and Aunt M says, "Oh, it's just a key to the old cellar of the old house. I must have turned it 1,000 times." And she's like, "No, it's Oz." And of course, she doesn't believe her. She's like, "What do we say?" And she's, not to talk about Oz. And again, you can just see the disappointment on Firuza Balk's face. Now, before we go on, controversial opinion time. I think Firuza Balk is a better Dorothy than Judy Garland. Now, I think that
Hmm.
Fighting word.
I think that they're
She is
both
a
perfect for.
different.
I think,
She's a different
yeah, they're
Dorothy.
both perfect for. They're both perfect for their respective versions. I just think in terms of psychological richness and really digging into the depths of a character at a young age, in a way that would be challenging for an adult actor to pull off. But she did it all the way at age 10. It's like, wow, that she has some performances, some looks and expressions and reads of particular lines that I'm just always floored every time that I see
Oh,
this film.
her level of acting in this film was incredible for a child actress.
Totally.
I was very impressed by it. The fact that you could see, I mean, you could actually read the emotion on her face during scenes where it was supposed to be, and many child actors really struggle with this, and I do feel like that was a excellent thing. Um, To me, I wanted to touch on something a little bit earlier on this. Um, One of the things I never got into Oz as much as I did Alice in Wonderland because Alice, even in the books, kind of fell a little bit harder on the potential for mental illness
Mm-hmm.
with Alice, and that always fascinated me that you could have somebody lost in their own world and imagination, whereas the Oz books tended to lean a lot more towards Oz being real.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my perception of it. And I do like this concept that it could be in her head a lot of ways. And they leave it kind of open ended in the movie that maybe Dorothy is still going through the motions. And I really do like that. I do have some issues with the mental health practices that they show there, but I'll address that when we get
Really?
to it.
Yeah.
Electroshock is standard practice for a young girl who can't sleep.
In the late 19th century.
Well, it's the late 19th
Yeah. Well,
century, but I have more to say about that when we get to it, and I will
and
be
we
quiet
we
here.
will. I do want to try to get through plot relatively quickly, just because I really want people to see the movie, and that's what matters here. So, but just very quickly, yeah, finds the key. She can't sleep, keeps talking about Oz. So, there's a new doctor in town with this newfangled treatment for sleeping disorders, and it's electroshock therapy, which, of course, as Brandon's well aware, the mental health field was very much in its infancy at that time. So, it's
A lot of
no
it was
surprise.
exploratory and experimental.
Yeah, exactly. And there were no, child ethics and stuff like that was virtually non-existent back
Oh,
then as
yeah.
well. So, but
Oh,
but they're doing it out of love.
children children had no what is it, rights
Oh,
whatsoever.
I,
Yeah,
I
really.
love the way that they presented this. The hospital, the Nurse Ratchet, essentially.
Hmm.
And really, she plays it
She
like
made
Nurse Ratchet.
She made Nurse Ratched seem almost pleasant in a way.
But that's the thing is they have this
Hmm.
nurse, and they put this together so that if you're a child watching this, the hospital is absolutely frightening, which is great because as a child watching this, the hospital is frightening just as it
Hmm.
would be to Dorothy. So you can really put yourself into her shoes. Hearing the screams and with her saying, "Is that a scream?" No, you're hearing things. These things.
Yes.
Uh, as it goes, the electroshock, which by the way, they would have put some sort of padding on the ears. They wouldn't have basically because if they had done it the way that they were doing it to her, they'd have just burned her ears straight off. One, she'd have bitten her tongue off because the idea of electroshock is to give a seizure in the brain. So unless this doctor is like, this is a cool machine. I need somebody to experiment with. You're my first one.
Hmm.
Which could be. You never know with this doctor, but it sounds like
Well,
he had done this before. So I would assume that this would be it.
yeah.
And electroshock
Well,
is still useful today for cases of stubborn depression, psychosis, but as a
and done
last
in the
ditch.
yeah, and done in the right ways. Because they, admittedly, to this day, in some ways, we're sort of trying to do microsurgery uh, with blunt instruments, in some ways, not as much as we once did, but it's like, it's still kind of a moving target in a way that other fields aren't as much. And then you see like this is especially this is the ultimate like trying to do microsurgery with blunt instruments. But yeah, the solution, of course, is electroshock therapy because of the time period and but you're right that they really do a good job of making the mental health hospital look frightening because the whole movie is really through Dorothy's eyes, and they do a great job of putting us in that world. But she does meet this kind of mysterious girl that the real world version of her, I don't think she ever gets a name. The same actress, of course, will end up playing Ozma in Oz. But yeah, the version of her that's in the mental health hospital, I don't think she ever gets a name. But she's kind of in a similar situation to Dorothy. Doesn't want to be there, and then eventually they are able to make a break for it as the power goes out. Which yeah, this particular hospital, you've got the creaky beds with the orderlies who are gonna be the Wheelers in Oz. And in fact, the way that the Wheelers look is basically like if you had a fusion of him and of the bed, almost like the Fly when Jeff Goldblum and the Fly become one, and then eventually the Brundle Fly and the Machine become one. Similar kind of thing. But yeah, they escape, get into the river, and she floats away downstream. And this is true to the I think it's Ozma of Oz is where she goes to Oz by water instead of by air. Um, and she ends up with Belina there, even though she wasn't with her in the hospital. And they find out that Oz has changed quite a lot. It's in ruins. The Yellow Brick Road is pretty torn up, and the people of Oz have been turned to stone. And the Wheelers roam the landscape.
which is
Princess
fairly
Mombi.
similar to which is fairly similar to the world of C.S. Lewis in a way.
Yeah, somewhat, but Princess Mombi is running free and has kind of achieved an alliance with the Gnome King, who, as we later find out, his and I have to give him credit, his motives make total sense. The people of the Emerald City, they stole his emeralds and he wants them back, you know? And now granted he's punishing people who had nothing to do with that generation of Emerald City inhabitants who did that. Uh, he's taking it out on the Scarecrow and all these people, but his villain motivation makes total sense, and I have to they always tell you in screenwriting classes to give your villains good arguments, and his motivation makes total sense. So kudos to them. And but like I said, they merge
Right.
the evil witch Mombi and Langwidere, Princess Langwidere. They merge them into one character here. um but it's at this point where we start to get into some of the freakier parts, like when the Wheelers appear for the first time. They that some interesting points have been brought up with the Wheelers, which is that yeah, they have their freaky laughs, and they have that the first time you see them is pretty scary, and especially when
Well,
their first words are "Come here, chicken," and it's like holy crap.
well, and I love how they set the Wheelers up as in the reality. She hears the squealing of the carts by the
Yes,
attendants in the hospital. So I love the fact that that squealing went with the Wheelers squealing when they were
yes, it did.
So I love that setup for it.
And it's the same actor too, which makes sense.
Hmm.
And the another little thing that I have to say I really love is that so Dorothy's able to fill in some of the Oz exposition because like the 39 film, this is again like yeah, this isn't really a sequel because she is able to catch Belina up on the Deadly Desert, which was in the books. There's actually four deserts on each side of Oz, but it's essentially one body of sand. But yes, she catches us up on the Deadly Desert, but she actually gets to see her old house, and she gets to see where her bedroom was and all that stuff, which again, like in a way, it kind of has like a Ghost of Christmas Past kind of feel to it, because she is ostensibly picking up the pieces of her old life and trying to see, do these broken pieces, can they fit back together again? And eventually the answer is, well, not really, no. She has to kind of start anew. But I like that idea of her thematically, she is regressing into her memories and into her old life, and seeing them as it's just as broken as her fantasy
Yeah,
world too.
I did like how they
Um,
balanced
you were
it
gonna say something?
with this. The things with the Deadly Desert. and then of course you had the broken path, the house, but you also had things like the lunch pail tree, little whimsical
Mhm.
bits to show that Oz is still Oz, with all of its
I
eccentricities.
wish I had I wish I had a lunch pail tree.
Don't we
I like that
all?
it grows a
Right?
ham
Right?
sandwich. So, is a
Oh, I
ham
know.
sandwich grown by a lunch pail tree vegan?
I don't know. That's a good
Long as
question.
it's on, as long as it has Swiss and it's on rye, I don't give a shit.
But
Uh,
let me ask y'all this: those of you who did see this,
I was just
how
thinking,
many people here saw this as a child? I know I did.
not me.
I did not.
I certainly did.
No.
Oh, wow. So I'm the only one that saw this at the
I
appropriate
did.
age? Oh, you did. Okay.
Nope,
So,
nope. I
oh, you
saw it
didn't.
as a kid.
Okay, so two of
I
us.
did.
The Wheelers were, in my opinion, some of the most scary characters as far as to a child. As an
Yes.
adult, they don't scare me nearly as much. Matter of fact, I look at them and say, well, what can you do? Bump into me as
Yeah,
I trip you because you're kind of useless?
that's exactly where I was gonna go because some interesting points have been brought up about the Wheelers. How yeah, when you first meet them, they're terrifying because of their voices and their cackling and the squeaking of the wheels and their
Those
helmets are
funky
kind of freaky. But
costumes.
yeah, but like, what can they really do to you? I mean, maybe they could run you over if they got enough speed.
Or
Maybe.
I would say maybe
They could.
I bet you would hurt like a bitch if if they ran over your feet.
Yeah, I mean but they could like mildly annoy you, or maybe they could bite you or something like that. But like the actual destructive capabilities of these things is not as much as our childlike minds kind of like to bring, like to think that they are. But yeah, what's interesting is it is funny. The Wheelers in this, as we have said, are very very find their conception. Then you look at them in Amazon's Lost in Oz, the series, and they're really interesting creatures there because they look sort of like white lions, but they have like wheels for paws, and they have like Scandinavian accents. It's kind of weird, but they're not scary. Kind of
Sounds
cool
like
in their own
they're
way. Um,
more like griffins on wheels.
Sorta, yeah. But again, they're not really bad characters, but they're interesting. I like that they went in their own direction. But anyway, so yeah, Wheelers are running around. In an effort to escape them, Dorothy meets up with TikTok, the jury in the army of Oz. He's a wind-up man, a mechanical man. Um, and he has, which again, very 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 period
He is.
appropriate because that was the late 1800s, early 1900s, and actually a little bit before that, but especially in that period, that was the age of the automaton and some early automations of usually in novelty form and stuff like that, but you did have mechanical men doing amusing things, like maybe they would draw a picture like in Hugo or something like that. But it was definitely the age of the automated wind up person or thing. And in fact, that was kind of an early precursor to a computer in a weird way. Just obviously a super primitive version of it. But
I liked
yeah,
how intricately detailed he was in this
yes,
particular film. I mean, he had three wind-up functions, if I remember correctly.
is thought, action, and speech.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he keeps running out of one or all of them at various points, and she has to keep winding him back up. Which that's
and
very true. That's very true to Oz. You know, these characters, they have their dysfunctional aspects, and they have to manage them.
and this is a similarity really between Oz and Wonderland in a way, because
Yeah.
there's that odd twisted logic, and it all functions on a logical level, but it's a logical level with a twist.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how they go about that, and especially with him. Whereas, I mean, even Dorothy says, it would be much better if you were able to wind yourself, if they had made you to be able to wind yourself.
Yep.
And some of these things, like this this what looks to be common sense on the surface, but then taken to a level that is not sensical at all. I really
Mhm.
like how they do that.
And that's actually very true to L. Frank Baum's characterizations of not just him, but really all the Oz characters. Because even in the original story, her three companions, they're all highly dysfunctional characters, and they all come to represent three pretty important virtues. Wisdom, courage, love. Um, and they all end up having that which they don't think they have, but they both, or all three of them, they have a lot of dysfunctional to them and a lot of just personality quirks that inform their characters. And same thing here. This character who's proud to not be alive, but he keeps running down his thought, his speech, his actions. Those three things are obviously important to make up a thinking being and a functioning being, a sentient being, and yet he's proud to not be alive. So that's sort of a great bit of humorous hypocrisy that again is emblematic of L. Frank Baum's characterizations. But yeah, meets up with him, meets up with Princess Mommy, who turns out to be pretty nefarious because she wants Dorothy's head for her head collection because she can take her heads off and swap them out. Which was again, that's a characterization of Princess Langwidere rather than Mombi the witch, who's just kind of like a wannabe witch in the marvelous land of Oz. But yeah, she has her head collection, which that's one of the more frightening scenes when she tries to steal the powder of life, which I'm glad that they brought that from the books. Dorothy tries to steal the power of life. Mombi's body wakes up and all the heads start screaming, which is pretty frightening, I have to say. And they
Yeah.
definitely emphasize how frightening that is. But again, it would be frightening to her. But again, nothing really happens that's like really all that graphic or anything
I
other than just
remember.
a torso without a head. But
Well, yeah, and that as a child, I am saying that bodiless head getting up off the bed, trying to go find its head, that scared me when I was a kid.
yeah,
I mean,
but
that was
it
the first
is
time
it
I've
is
seen a torso in that function in that way, and the fact that you heard the Dorothy Gale, and she's trying
Yeah.
to run back
yeah.
stairs, and you hear it echoing down the hall, and that's when you get that moment of like momentum where she's got to get the fuck out of
Oh,
there.
I know. Well, it's that's such a great scene, but so and I mentioned Fairuza Balk as Dorothy, not just performance wise, because again, I think she just does such an amazing job. I can't give her enough praise. But writing wise, her characterization here is truer to the book as well, because Dorothy, is a very overall kind of person in book and screen and the 1939 version. So that part's the same. The part that's emphasized here a bit more is that she is very polite, which you saw in the 1939 version as well. She's more assertive here in a way that doesn't like it still feels in character, and she's not like overdoing it either because she's not like really forcing it, but like she will say, to Mombi, I believe you will not, and she kind of bluffs her way into the Gnome King's palace by saying that her armies will defeat him and that kind of stuff. And again, Judy Garland definitely had her moments too, but it's like I just think that this version of Dorothy, plus given how young she is, it's like wow, she's brave, but she's not invincible there, so they hit that balance right. Um, and it is appropriate for the character because her character could be that way as well. She wasn't like a shrinking violet or someone that needed to have things done for her.
Yeah, I like how when it gets in there at that line, your army,
Yeah, I
with the
know.
whole laughing response, shaking the entire mountain down.
That
Did
was
Well,
funny.
did we
I,
talk about Jack as a character since we kind
We're
of went
getting there
over
right
there?
now.
Yeah.
We're getting there right now because, well, before she tries to get the power of life to escape, she does end up meeting Head, who played a much bigger role in the marvelous Land of Oz. Because, fun fact, Dorothy does not appear in the marvelous Land of Oz. In fact, Dorothy is not the main character of most of the Oz books. Um, a boy named Tip is the protagonist of the marvelous Land of Oz, and who, spoiler alert, turns out to be Princess Ozma, having been changed from a girl to a boy, to keep her from ascending to the throne of Oz. And then eventually she becomes her true form of Ozma. Um, but here you see that Jack was made by someone that he can't remember. In fact, it is Ozma, which that part's true to the book. But he has a very kind of curious personality. He's very kind of laid back, easygoing. Um, I love the voice and Henson puppeteering him and doing the voice. I really love his voice. He sounds just like what I would imagine that character would sound like.
Oh,
Because he's very innocent. He's very curious about the world,
childlike.
and yeah, exactly. So
well,
he's a good.
he was a perfect character to kind of bridge the gap between creepy and child friendly for this movie.
Well, and to me, he kind of reminded me, especially in the very beginning, of the Scarecrow character, even though we don't see the Scarecrow until the end of the movie. But the fact that, his arms and legs needed to be put back together,
Yeah.
it kind of reminded me of when the Scarecrow had the stuffing knocked out of him,
Yeah.
and that was similarities.
Now it is funny you bring that up because again, her main three companions from the original story, they're not in this all that much, but she does have another assembled assembled being, that's kind of vegetation related. She has another mechanical man, and she's got a fantastical creature, the Gump.
Yeah,
You know, so
very
you
very
know,
much representations of all three of the
yeah,
originals.
she's got
Mhm.
some. I'm sure that they did that somewhat on purpose, but again, it is fair to note those are all characters from the books, so they didn't just pull it out of their asses or anything. But yeah, so they meet up, and Jack is very innocent, very childlike, and he wants to call Dorothy mom, because he can't remember who his real creator was and all that stuff, and the scene where they're assembling the Gump and using the powder of life and all that stuff, that's actually right from the books there, I think from the Marvelous Land of Oz. That's right from there, and just how what a mismatch the Gump is. So a Gump in Oz is essentially what the head of that thing, that is essentially what it is. Like, imagine like a body for that thing, and that's essentially what it would be. It's kind of a moose like looking thing, and but they just stuck a Gump's head onto the couch. They threw on this and this and this, and it really is this hodgepodge of randomness. But again, that's true to the book, and the powder of life plays a big role in a lot of the other books and things. But it is kind of strange just what a concoction he is, and they that whole scene put them together. It's very much like a comedy of errors, and that's very true to the spirit of the books, and it's a good contrast for how creepy the scene with her going, "Dorothy, girl," that whole thing. Good
I
contrast
can
there.
just
Mhm.
imagine the director shouting on, "Okay, just tie that rope here. Here. Okay, we're good. All right, raise it up."
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And actually, Dorothy kind of takes on that role a little bit. She's like, "Put that there and that there."
Yeah, the whole it was interesting how they went through the idea that the so the Army of Oz essentially is he runs down quicker if he uses one part longer. So because he was thinking more heavily, his thought process ran down more quickly.
Hmm.
And it was kind of funny how he was like talking to Jack and saying, "I understand the plan better than you do," which was funny.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was the little bit of comedy that they threw in. That was pretty priceless.
But you
well,
have to have a balance if you're going to do a children's film
you
with
do.
some potentially scary elements. It's more important than ever to have a good balance because the children have to still maintain viewership because if it's all scary, it's going to scare away most of the children, not all of them. There's some twisted ones out there. I'm sure that a few were here and on this team even come to think of it, watching and enjoying horrific stuff at an early age. But for others like myself, for instance, who had a hard time with horror as a child, the balance was there enough to leave me with that fantastical element to
Hmm.
enjoy as a child and a little bit of humor to laugh at. Characters like Belina, like Jack, who kind of bridge the gap, or even TikTok. These optimistic and at times funny characters carried the movie and left it from becoming something really depressing or
Oh yeah,
entirely dark. It's not as dark a movie as people will make it out as, but it's only dark because people compare it to
yeah.
the musical, which
And
is
even that had
not
its dark
yeah
elements.
yeah exactly.
Like people to this kids to this day of this generation, when they because the 1939 film is usually one of the first movies that a lot of kids see, and the witch still scares the crap out of kids, and
Or
it
like the part where the lion, they're all going through the forest, and
yeah.
he's reading off the signs, and it's saying, "I'd
I'd
turn back
turn
if
back
I
if
were
I were
you."
you. Yeah, I do believe
Okay.
in spooks. I do believe in spooks. I do. I do. I do. I do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's where he starts saying, "I believe in spooks. I do believe in spooks." I don't know. That kind of comes up. I mean, this is completely unintentional. I'm sure it was completely unintentional, but I don't know. It's almost sounds in this day and age almost pretty racist.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah,
Yeah,
context wise, it's not intended to be
of
that, but
course.
but you're right about the tonal balance there. So in the books and this film also, it's like, yeah, they to me, I think they strike the balance really nicely because again, the books had a lot of comedic moments in them that because these characters were pretty fundamentally dysfunctional, and that's part of their charm. And they had freaky characters and they had funny, weird characters and all that stuff. And you get all that stuff here. But they use the powder of life to create the Gump, which they have these. Again, he's so thrown together. He's got the ferns for wings, and he has a proper Gump. He didn't have wings, I assume. And so he's having to learn how to fly and carry all these weird creatures, and they're flying out of the Emerald City. And it is funny, but it's a great shot when they're actually flying over the Emerald City. You see Dorothy's face light up and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Now, I will say the blue screen or the green screen compositing in this, because it was the 80s and there was pre CGI and all that stuff, it is pretty obvious. But again, that's just part and parcel of the time.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, but
I do
again,
want to
they
say,
go ahead.
say also from the beginning, the Gnome King has actually had a shall I say, lookout rock formation, keeping an eye on the situation up
Yes,
until this point.
yes, he has, and well, and that's some pretty interesting stop motion that you see, and then when they cross the deadly desert by flying over it, and they get to the Gnome King's kingdom. which again, there are a ton of lands outside of the land of Oz. It's a much bigger
Mhm.
world than people think that it is. But yeah, they get to his kingdom, and that's where he makes himself known as basically this rock creature. Which now the Gnome King did exist, in an underground kingdom, but he wasn't really a rock creature per se. But they do some really awesome things with that. And I do love that Dorothy kind of bluffs her way in with the our armies will take you down and that kind of stuff. But she does it again very politely because she's a well raised Kansas farm girl. So she's yes, Your Majesty, and she genuflects and everything. So she doesn't she doesn't lay the hammer down right away, but she does proper negotiations. She starts off nice, and then she's gonna escalate it if she has to. And I was like, hey, look at that, you're learning, you're wise beyond your years, Dorothy. But I really love the scene where as she's tumbling down into the Gnome King's domain, how again he explains why he wants the emeralds back and all that stuff because they did belong to the gnomes. And so you can totally imagine why he would do what he's doing, and why he would form the alliance with Mombi and all that stuff. But I like what she says back, which is, that he's blaming people for things that they didn't do. And so again, both sides have their important points, and you see a lot of stuff like that nowadays of people like historical injustices and that kind of stuff, and then it's like, well, that's correct, but
Again
also like there are
here,
people. Go
Uh,
ahead.
I think I'm going to confer with Brandon's opinion that there are similarities with Alice in Wonderland in this, because here she's almost like she's tumbling down the rabbit hole. You
Yeah, a
know,
little bit.
I think there were. I think there's always been a kind of a cross pollination between the two series. Even though I don't know if they're real, I don't think they really function at the same time. But there is a lot of similarity
Well,
when it comes
it's
to both.
pretty explicitly so, actually, because L. Frank Baum explicitly was inspired by Alice's Adventures in
I
Wonderland
see. There
and
you
Through the
go.
Looking Glass having come first. But different time periods in which they were written. It was the 1860s for Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and it was 1900 for The Wizard of Oz. And obviously, Alice in Wonderland is about as English as tea and biscuits, whereas The Wizard of Oz is as American as blue jeans and apple pie. Um, and it always has been. It's about as American of fantasy literature as you can get. Um, and yeah, very
well, uh,
very key
with
differences. But
elements of Little House on the
but
Prairie thrown in for the mix.
which I think the first in that series was Little House in the Big Woods, if I recall. But the yeah, American kind of, I guess you could call it pioneer literature as well as fantasy. But yeah, she gets down there to his realm, and her friends follow, and of course, in classical fantasy fashion, we have a test, a test of will and of courage, and basically, in his room of ornaments, in the Gnome King's room of ornaments, which that's got a lot of symbolism to it, that he's a lot of knickknacks. He's got a lot of kind of riches of the world in a sense, but they're just sitting there. They're not doing anything, and they're just being hoarded. Which again, you can bring up some of those kind of historical injustice aspects of the emeralds and that kind of
which
stuff. But then
which
you also look at the riches that he has, and he's with
Oh
them.
yeah. Well, that's something that is a difference between watching this as an adult than as a child. Because as a child,
Hmm.
I was right there with Dorothy. Is like it wasn't, it was. They were there when he came, and all this. It's unfair. Um, but I can understand where the Gnome King's wrath is. He didn't have the power to strike out. They were too powerful for him
Hmm.
at the time, until the ruby slippers came into his possession. And in reality, that is truly an interesting way of coming about it. The what was it that I was going? Oh, the kind of hypocrisy that he has of taking everything. He himself wants everything for himself.
Mm-hmm. Well,
He wants to be human, as a matter of fact, at the end, and utilizing Dorothy and her friends to try and extract that humanity for himself. These are things that he himself wants to take. It's
yes,
I love the
exactly.
kind of hypocrisy in that it's a complexity that you can't really see as a child unless you're really adept child at it. But it's really cool that the film adapts as an adult.
And if you dive into any kind of historical conflict, you'll usually see like gives and takes, and one side wants this and they don't have it, and then they get it back, and then they end up same kinds of things and that sort of stuff. So it's very true to life.
But what he
But
doesn't know is
the challenge, of
what
course.
he. What I was going to say is what he, the Gnome King, doesn't know is they came with a Trojan horse of their own.
Yeah, somewhat. Um, and that's sort of one of those dumb luck kind of things. But again, that does have a basis in the book, the weakness to eggs and all that stuff. But yeah, the test, of course, is that if they can guess the object that her friends have been turned into in the room, they can guess that, and then they can go free. And of course, if they don't get their three guesses, if they don't get it right, then they become an ornament. And Dorothy, well, now I like the fact that TikTok does it really, really smart, where he pretends to have his movement, his thinking, all that stuff, pretends to have wound down, so that she has to come in after him, and that way he can kind of help her, which I thought, man, that's smart. Um, and then but she ultimately is able to figure it out, which is the green objects, are her friends, and that's where she's able to find the scarecrow, turn him back. And I like the look of the scarecrow here better, because he does resemble his book counterpart a lot more. And he looks like a creature rather than like a humanoid, which, I mean, I guess technically Scarecrow kind of is a humanoid, but you know what I mean. He looks not like a person in makeup. He looks like a fake person that was brought to life.
I mean, and there is that naivety that Dorothy has, which one could say is a good way of applying it to her friends as well, saying if you want to make the argument that it's all in her head, because they share that naivety of not even bothering to ask what happens if we fail the
Hmm.
task, which I do find that interesting, that a lot of them do tend to share her childlike naivety. And I can see that for Jack, especially because, well, Jack is a child.
Hmm.
But for the rest, it's kind of interesting that level still maintains with them. Even
And
Well,
TikTok.
the
that's very
army of.
true. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mhm.
Well, that's
Go
it.
ahead, Dave.
It's very true to the it's very what you're saying there is very true to the spirit of L. Frank Baum's books, because the characters of Oz tend to reflect very childlike attitudes and very childlike instincts. Um, that's always been there. Uh, it's not so much like, because with you talk about the Alice in Wonderland comparisons, you really get the sense there that those characters, the Wonderland characters, are almost like abusive, or at least neglectful adults, or rules-oriented adults that are badgering her. That's kind of the attitude that they have. They don't seem like they themselves are children necessarily, or that they have childlike qualities. But generally, the Oz characters tend to. So that's another important difference.
I would like to say that TikTok. Well, he was evidently made to be a servant. So he is
A soldier.
in that, yeah, a soldier. So he follows orders. So
Yeah.
honestly, if you're a soldier and that's all you've known, in a sense, you can almost have a childlike nature about yourself if that's all you know. You know, the world outside of being a soldier is. It's just like if you've been years a veteran of like a war, and suddenly you're thrust into the realities of everyday life. You're not ready for it because there are always new things like having progress, and things that you have to get used to. It's just the same as him. So I can imagine that he is very military, very strict, very, regimental, and anything outside of those orders are, new to him or odd to him or strange to him. So it might be that kind of way with him. As far as the Gump is concerned, well, he he was stuck on the fucking couch, and
Well,
is this
he is the
monstrosity?
he is the furniture.
He probably doesn't have much say so in the matter, and y'all are fast, that kind of thing. So
The Gump is
he just
kind of
has to
captive
go
audience.
with the flow.
I always consider the Gump the captive audience that's along for the ride.
Yeah,
But,
and he actually in the book he asks them to basically disassemble him, so it's almost like assisted suicide in a weird way. But yeah, so she guesses correctly. They crack the code. It's the green objects, and as we mentioned before, with each failure of her friends, because they all go through their trials. With each of their failures, the Gnome King gets more and more human, and he in fact tempts Dorothy by saying, all she has to do is go home. She doesn't really have much in the way of she doesn't really have much to do with Oz anymore, and she can just make this all go away because he has the ruby slippers, which again in the book it was the silver shoes, but he has the ruby slippers in his possession.
We do have to mention the whole thing with the gnomes, because there is a scene where all these gnomes come up out of the woodworks, and I swear to God,
Yes.
you see Itchy, Scratchy, and Fatso in those gnomes.
They do look a little similar, but I like the fact that he does give her that temptation before she does crack the code, because in my Oztober analysis of this film, I actually compare this to The Empire Strikes Back. If the 1939 film is similar to A New Hope, then this is definitely similar to
I think that
The
they do a
Empire
good
Strikes
job of
Back realm of like temptation.
they do a good job of reflecting the psychiatrist characteristic, and keep in mind, psychiatrists and mental health professionals are very different in the 1890s as they are today. Today, they're just basically you see them for 5 minutes, they assign you meds, they kick you out.
Yeah.
Back then, they were jacks of all trades. It was a very new science, and of course, there weren't regulations, so anybody could be a psychiatrist back in those days. It was kind of funny that way, but of course, the way that he talked is a very therapeutic way of looking at it, trying to be empathetic, and it could be the reflection of him being more human. But I do like that it reflects on the other character that is
Yeah. Well,
represented in the real world.
I did not dislike the doctor equivalent of him either. Like, I never got the sense that he was a bad guy. I just got the sense that he was kind of a product of his
Yeah.
time and the fact that it was such an early science and all that stuff.
Unlike many
And
psychiatrists
even
at the time, which were very bad guys.
yeah,
The
well,
way
and even
I
with even with the Gnome King here, like you get the sense that he's not pitiless. He wants what he wants, but he's also not completely without compassion or anything. So I like it when villains can be that way, when they have enough sympathy for the protagonist, but they still want to do what they want to do.
Very faintly, you could almost say that the character of the Doctor was very much like our uh, wagon crystal ball character, because in a sense that guy in the original 1939 film was what you would call a
Professor
medicine man.
Marvel. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Marvel. In a sense, you could almost say he was like an upside down character of the Professor Marvel character, because he was this scientist with like trying to bring out the new future, in his product, So
Yeah. Well, Professor Marvel not
That's
in
a,
the book
he was
whatsoever.
trying to bring out the future in his crystal ball. It was not
Something
a
like that.
particularly accurate future, but
Yeah. Well, but so they figure out the pattern. They get all their friends back, and of course, that's when all hell breaks loose, practically, uh, with the lava and all that stuff. And it is basically like they go to hell, and
Well, I don't.
but that's where we go ahead.
For all his talk of fairness, in reality, he had no intention of playing fair at all, which was very much shown. Like when he starts to lose, he's like, screw that. I am
Oh, I
going
know.
to do my own thing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that all that stuff I mentioned before that has its limits, that's for sure. Um, and but that's when he's about to eat her friends, and in a pretty freaky scene there. But that's where Belita, who had not been laying for the whole movie, that's when she finally poops out an egg, and it turns out that eggs are poisonous to gnomes. Which at first you might think, well, geez, that's kind of random, and yeah, it kind of is. But at the same time, there is some good there as far as like eggs are fundamentally maternal, and they're loving ultimately, and so that you could argue that it's compassion, it's all those kinds of things that ultimately conquers the coldness of the stone, and that sort of thing. So that's a good way to work that in. And but upon defeating the Gnome King, um, the they get out of the Gnome King's realm, and they release the rest of Dorothy's friends and the denizens of the Emerald City, which Dorothy uses the Emerald Ruby Slippers to do that because she now knows how to use their power. Um, and the Emerald City is restored, and so is Ozma, the rightful ruler of Oz, who was trapped behind a mirror. Now they don't go into the whole like she used to be Tip, that whole thing, partially because the only way you could do that is if she was like the protagonist or a bigger character in which you could establish who the heck Tip even is. That whole thing. But what's interesting there with her being trapped behind the mirror is and just like Dorothy's like, you're so beautiful, everything. I almost got the sense that she sees Ozma as almost like an idealized self for her, for
Oh,
Dorothy, because she is kind of regal, she's self-assured, she's a ruler, all that stuff. And so I almost got that sense that that Ozma was like Dorothy fully realized, and that it's something for her to aspire to.
doesn't that go along with her wish, really, if you think about it?
mhm.
Her
It
wish that she
does.
could be both places at once.
Yes, and that's to me, that line and the scenes that follow it, to me that kind of is the movie. Because so what's the lesson of the 1939 film, and actually even of the book, because there's no place like home does come from the book originally. But what's the lesson? It's there's no place like home. That's what everyone knows, and they even echo that in here. But the truth is, and what I think the message of this film is that, yeah, but that's hardly the end of the story. You know, that home at this stage is pretty destroyed, broken, and but then Oz, this escape world, this escapist reality, presumably, if we're to look at it through that lens, it too has its dark aspects. It too is not always pleasant and nice. So one has to have elements of both within them in order to be a fully realized adult, a fully realized person. And I
I
think
bel
that's to me, that's a more mature message. That's a more complex message than simply "There's no place like home."
I believe that the message of the film is that there is hope.
Oh
Um,
yeah, definitely.
to me, that no matter how bad things get, things can get better, and I think that's the
Yes.
message of the film. At the end of all things, because at the end of her journey, everything was all hunky dory. I mean, they were having a Macy's Day Thanksgiving parade there, you know. So
Well, it's there's always well, but there's always hope. It has to have it has to be informed through the lens of having gone through a lot of hardship to get there. And that to me, again, that's a more complex, more mature message that I can relate to a lot, you know, and then I suspect everyone can when they um because, you know, the hope is something that you acquire because you need it, because you need to get through that which is seemingly unendurable. And I think Dorothy goes through a lot of things that would be unendurable for a little girl at that time with very little resources and all that in the real world, let alone all she goes through in Oz. And you know, so I think it is ultimately her quest to try to put the pieces of her life back together while these other forces in the adult world and in the world take from her who she is. They're trying to destroy her mind and her memories, her imagination, and she is able to resist that and is able, but not, you know, by running away, but by utilizing childhood imagination and through the lens of having survived and endured through horrifically traumatic events. And so when she returns to the real world, it's kind of a bittersweet event. And she gives one of the best acting moments I've ever seen in a film where she's being held by Aunt M and she gives that look that is just so haunting. And I think that kind of says it all because she is glad to be home, but it's also kind of bittersweet because again, home is still kind of up in the air. It's still broken and she's glad to be home, but it's just not hunky dory all the way through. And she communicates that so brilliantly without having to say a word, and I just take my hat I applaud every time I see that, you know, at how good of a job Fairuza Balk did. Um, but it ultimately is a happy ending because Ozma grants her the mirror with which she can look back into Oz and can come and go as she chooses, and so she always has that path back to childhood imagination and that path back to hope with her at all times, no matter what life has to throw at her. And so, you know, she's able to progress in her life. And that really is kind of where we leave off with the plot there. But yeah, I think there's so much more to this film than a lot of people at the time gave it credit for. I think it's a much deeper film than people think. And the fact that it kind of got blithely dismissed by Gene and by Siskel and
sis-
Roger Ebert at the time, it got
they
so
they
blithely
got this
dismissed
film
by
so
them,
wrong.
and they did. And the thing is, those guys, they weren't dumb guys. They were very astute, and they really but loved the film medium and everything. But they could really get
Shit
something
on a
really
film.
wrong. They
They
could
could shit
really
on
get
a
stuff
film,
wrong.
basically.
Yeah, and but again, to be fair, they were not the only ones. You know, nobody really liked this film when it came out, and it did not get. It was not financially successful. Walter Murch never directed another movie, um, and you know, they did not produce sequels or anything. The Oz books fell into the public domain, and Disney did try to strike gold once again with Oz the Great and Powerful. Many other people came along and produced various Oz interpretations from that point on because they could, because it was public domain, to various degrees of success. See my series Oztober all about those. Um, and but yeah, I think this one for me, I think this is up there with the 1939 film, and in many ways, I think it surpasses it. Certainly in terms of fidelity to the style and tone of the books, but also taking this, you know, what could is often kind of thought of as like a light, fluffy story, and going in a lot of really interesting, I think, mature, moving directions. Um, but yeah, that's Return to Oz on the plot level, moments, that sort of thing. The musical score does not get talked about nearly as much as perhaps it should be. It was actually David Shire who he was known. Most people, including myself, probably best know him for that song "Manhattan Skyline" on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
Mhm.
He was actually a very prolific composer for movies like The Conversation, All the President's Men, you know, things like that. And but I think his score is pretty darn good in this. It can actually be pretty sad and pretty you know, it can be terrifying and spot, but it can also be whimsical and, you know, does a good job of cueing the emotion. But especially the opening theme there when she's laying in bed and it's like, oh, you can hear the mournfulness in it, and I love it.
I did want to say that the Wheeler, the main Wheeler,
Yeah,
he was played by John Alexander, and he was in quite a few other things that I didn't realize he was in. He was in Men in Black. He was in Planet of the Apes. He was in How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 2000 as one of the shoppers. He was in The Haunted Mansion as the Tea Ghost. He and most recently he was
That's a lot of
um,
stuff.
in The Mill at Calder's End, which was a very cool short film with stop motion animation. So, also notably for playing Johann Kraus, or otherwise known as Beth Muir Goblin in Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. So, he's definitely been in quite a few things. So, since
and fun fact here that we didn't really touch on. So Piper Laurie, who played Carrie's insane mother in Brian De Palma's adaptation of Stephen King's Carrie, plays Aunt Em in this version, and she's not crazy and not malicious and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, look at that. She can do the other side too, because she was so well known for playing Carrie's mom. Um,
oh shit, he
yeah,
actually John Alexander played Mighty Joe Young in Mighty Joe Young, the 1998 version. Cool.
nice. That is cool. So we got music, we got the plot. Favorite moments. Whoever wants to go on that one. I'm trying to think of it because I guess for me
My
it might be that. So I think it'd be that look that she gives towards the end, which it's a very specific one. But it's as she's being held by Aunt Em, and as the nurse is getting wheeled away in the police cart.
That's one of mine, but another is the whole Mombi sequence where you get to meet the seven heads and the whole Dorothy Guild. I don't know why, but
Yeah,
that part always gets me.
it's creepy.
Right. I guess I'll go. I'm not sure the maybe the part that, as you mentioned, Dane, the parts where you get to see that you actually have some real acting going on here and there. That's kind of a nice change up from the. I hate to say it, change up from the original, but it kind of is. But and also but probably some of the rooster chicken, not rooster chickens.
Belina.
Yeah, Belina. Some of her little comments, there were some pretty fun ones.
Hell yeah! How about the part? How about the part where
There's
they
just no hunk of junk like the tea kettle on the farm.
where they all land on the gnome's mountain, and Jack says, "Why is everybody standing on their heads?"
Yeah. Oh, and I like the she always Belina has something like she's like a total like down home country kind of girl,
Right.
which again makes total sense because she's just a farm chicken.
Right.
But she's like, oh, hon, I love her voice. It's perfect. It's just what I would imagine a chicken would sound like.
Well, there's like the one where they come across all the statues of, I guess they were these women doing this sort of a slow dance or something when they were beheaded. I guess was the gist of it. And Dorothy's like, look, Belina, these ones have lost their heads. And she's like, now that's just what I call just plain carelessness,
I know.
What's odd is that I look at Belina and she really does remind me of my grandmother on my farmer's side, on my father's side. Actually, I don't know. I think the only person who's met my grandmother on that side is Jacob, which I don't know if you even remember her before she had actually lost a lot of her cognitive ability. It would have been very close to that time.
It is most
very
notable.
similar to that.
It is most notable to mention that the voice of Belina is played by Denise Breyer, who also voiced the Junk Lady in Labyrinth. So there is that kind of a connection.
I thought it sounded familiar.
There you go, dear.
I love her voice, and it's just perfect for a chicken. It totally is. And actually, I do like
We're definitely not in Kansas anymore.
You like your horsey?
I know.
Horsey.
And I like the again. It's different from Ray Bolger, but I like the voice that they had for the Scarecrow in this. That worked out well, and I liked it. I liked his face. I liked his hands and everything. It looked just like the books.
I think all the voice acting was done very well.
I also will mention, just as this is not really so much a part of the film itself, but something that I found fun is that apparently Tim Burton has gone on record saying that Jack Skellington borrows a more than a slight debt to the appearance of Jack Pumpkinhead here. And the idea of him being the Pumpkin King probably was also partly from that. And so I like that because, of course, that's a quality one, too. So, it's nice when you have those connections.
Yeah. Also, the character of Jack Pumpkinhead is in the public domain. So, if he were to lift it, it's not a ripoff. He could.
It is notable.
What's the word? Actionable ripoff.
Exactly.
The voice of Jack the Pumpkin,
Brian Henson.
It was Brian Henson, who was also the voice of Hoggle and a couple of goblins in Labyrinth as well. So definitely some voices here that are fairly familiar in the Henson family.
And then let's see, Brandon, favorite moment.
There are a lot of them. I just enjoyed the movie overall. The I can think of. I'm trying to think of one in particular. I guess I could say just I love the ending scene with all of the parades and stuff that they're doing, showing kind of a reflection of the Oz from the original film, because you could see that reflection of like the old the old style of them coming in and their new fashions and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool seeing that with just all of the effects and costume design just for that scene alone would have to be worth a lot. But I also enjoyed the part
Oh
with
yeah.
the introduction of the machine, the doctor trying to show the electroshock machine is like, see, it's got a face. Here's the eyes and
Yeah.
the nose, and here's his
You
tongue.
also might like to know that TikTok's voice is voiced by Sean Barrett, and he has a strong tie to anime, including Venus Wars, which we not too recently talked about not too long ago.
Good film.
He played the dad, Simus, soldier in the English version. In other films of that ilk, also he played in or voiced in Labyrinth as well. So, and a couple of Lupins, just so you know.
Shoot.
Well,
If the votes
so
don't change soon, we'll be seeing an
so
anime
some
next
of
month.
yeah. Well, some of these connections that we're making here, the person that we haven't mentioned that's kind of the glue for some of these things, because we mentioned Francis Ford Coppola movies like Apocalypse Now, The Godfather
Right.
trilogy, etc. Coppola is a glue for this, but the even bigger glue is actually George Lucas.
Right.
Because keep in mind he was heavily involved with Labyrinth,
Mhm.
obviously the Star Wars connection and all that stuff. He
And he
actually
owns all
was
this
the
now.
and THX 1138 and American we
There's also
mentioned.
some connection
George
if you
Lucas
think.
was the one who helped. He and Francis, well, he and Francis Ford Coppola both helped to get Walter Murch the directing job, and Walter Murch actually got fired from this from his position, and they actually persuaded Disney to rehire him.
Right. It's good to have friends.
I think that
in high places.
there's also
Yes.
a connection in a lot of ways when you think about the Henson connection, because a lot of times when Henson tried to hit more serious subjects, when he would do films like Labyrinth or The Dark Crystal, a lot was invested, but the returns were nowhere near what they were hoping for.
hmm But yeah, this was around that period where George Lucas was, at least as an executive producer, he was getting, more heavily involved with certain things and was able to connect people together in such a way that maybe wasn't as appreciated in its time, but it would eventually it would blossom, because Labyrinth wasn't a big success at the time either,
Oh no.
nor was The Dark Crystal, but they've both gone on to become beloved. So,
I think all three of these films, really, if you look at all three of them, have come on to gain almost a cult status and an underground following as time went on.
oh, I know,
Absolutely.
totally. Forrest, favorite moment?
I would probably say the Mombi heads.
Mombi head.
Yeah, the head scene. Yeah, the scene with the heads.
Oh, totally. Um, and Jake, did you say your favorite?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, just certain little moments of dialogue, mostly. The scene with the Mombi heads, I will agree, that was also a pretty good one. And yeah,
Well, if if anyone has anything else to add, then let me know. I think I think this is just an exceptional film. Do stick around. October 15th is when my entry in Oztober we'll be talking about this film again. And my channel is Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS, Dangerous Arts. That's where you can find some more details on Return to Oz and 31 Oz film and TV adaptations all throughout the month of October.
Definitely. There is one more thing I'd like to add is the voice of the Gump. The voice of the Gump is Lyle Conway, and he was heavily behind the creature design of the Blob from the 1998 version, and also some work with Deep Rising, and he was a sculptor of some of the creatures from Where the Wild Things Are, among others, and some of the creature design behind the Dark Crystal. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So other than that, did we want to go through our outros? I know, Dane, you already did.
Well, I kind of already gave mine, so.
Forrest, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Great. My name is Forrest Bennett. I am an independent film producer based on Long Island, and I've always got something going on in the pipeline.
Alrighty. Heading over to you, Brandon. Or actually, let's go to you, Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, my name's Jake. I live here in Central Virginia, where I am an avid collector of all sorts of media, movies, music, comics and manga and books. Mostly movies and shows. And I, work, occasionally play. But I like to take time out to come hang out with these fine folks on this channel. And also, I'm the co-host on another channel, SeptumSin versus the World, where we talk about our love for media and physical media collection. And I'm still plugging our Versus Awards that came out last month. They were a lot of fun, and if you haven't checked them out already, you should certainly do so. And I'll go ahead and let Brandon tell you all the rest about that. Oh.
Definitely. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm SeptumSin, SeptumSin versus the World. We like physical media here, all about the collection and love of, well, mostly movies, but occasionally cover of video games, books, and other various physical media. Now, we do mostly weekly pickups. We have been doing release information, but it's been kind of backed off of. But if there is a increased interest in it, of course, we will focus back on that. As Jake said, we did our Versus Awards, but of course, we're in the spooky season, which gives us the Horrorween, where we are playing through a game called The Gregory Horror Show. We won't be doing an episode this week, but we're going to double up next week, and we're going to try and work towards finishing the game. Jake and I are going to take turns playing it and see how far we can get. And of course, this week for the pickups, we had a guest, Dustin, who we see here with the Crypt of Horrors, had guested on the pickups this week on our channel. So you should check that out tomorrow. But also, I work with Inside Movies Galore to help arrange the schedules. But next week, we're going to be celebrating a birthday, and I thought I would say briefly to Dane to tell us about the two films we'll be covering for that birthday.
Yeah, two films that we'll be covering will be Lost Highway, David Lynch's one of his most underrated films, and actually the first that I ever saw of his. And we'll be covering Bram Stoker's Dracula, a fantastic adaptation of another fantastic book, which is also in the public domain. So keep an eye out for that one.
Good times.
Alrighty. And my name is David Streggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming down the yellow brick road with us. Maybe, I think, for the first time, even though but we will definitely be checking out more adaptations of Oz probably on this podcast. But
We will have to hit the original one day.
yes, most assuredly.
Oh.
But go ahead.
I was going to say, I forgot to say at the beginning that I said this was only the second one I've done. I lied. I did see Oz the Great and Powerful, so just throwing it out there.
But I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I go on about my own video pickups and my own video reviews. So go ahead, check out both of these channels and like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully we'll see you next week back with us on these fairly engrossing films that we have in store for you. So all I gotta say is there's no place like home.
Indeed.
There's no place like